Way to graph quadratic functions with absolute value. For instance, if we have a quadratic function in the vertex form and we know how to graph it. So the graph of the function, if we graph it with the graphing utilities, or even if we graph it by hand, is going to be this graph of the function here. But now we want to know, for example, with absolute value, how we can graph. We are not interested without absolute value. If we are graphing in the graphing utilities Desmos, or I used the Desmos here, and I got this graph of the function. So with absolute value. But is very different from the without absolute value, because with absolute value we already know the graph of the function is going to be in the upper side y f of x is a positive. It's not going to be negative. So now let's compare two functions. Now if we have a function without absolute value and with absolute value, what's going to happen here, the blue graph of the function, which is without absolute value, here is in the negative side. The graph is the negative side. But this side of the graph is going to reflect over x-axis. And when we have absolute value and going to reflect on this side, then it's going to be in a positive side. So everything is easy. When we know this side, for example, how to graph it without absolute value, we just reflect whatever is in the negative side here, f of x, we are reflecting our x-axis and it's going to be in the positive side. So now, for example, the vertex here is minus 2 and minus 3. Here is going to be vertex minus 2 and 3. In other words, whatever is the x coordinate is going to stay the same in both in this vertex and with the absolute value vertex. But the only change is going to be here in the y coordinate. If here is a negative, the y coordinate always is going to be positive. But the x coordinate can be negative or positive. By y coordinate always is going to be positive when it's with the absolute value. So now let's go to another function, which is a quadratic function in standard form. If we already know how to graph it, or we graph it with the graphing utilities, this specific quadratic function in standard form is going to be this graph here. But now we want to know, for example, how it's going to be with absolute value. If we are graphing with absolute value, is very different from the graph of the function with without absolute value. If we are looking here, is very differently, looks very different. But now we wanted to compare and to see if we know, for example, how to graph a quadratic function in standard form. The only difference here again is just the negative side of the graph is going to reflect over x-axis. Same thing here in the standard form. Same, because the graph of the function doesn't matter is for quadratic function in standard form, if we are talking about the same function, or is in vertex form or factors form, the graph is going to look always the same. And now this graph is going to be reflection over x-axis. For example, same thing, vertex here was because it's in the fourth quadrant is a negative x and y is a negative y. Here the vertex is going to be, the x is going to be the same, it's not going to experience any changes, minus x, but y is going to be always a positive. The coordinate in the vertex or any other points here in this graph with absolute value is going to be with the positive.